What good is a biomechanical analysis? This may seem like a kind of a silly question because we hear this term being used quite a bit. Biomechanical analysis of running or throwing or whatever the sport may be, or the athlete. So it's as though the biomechanical analysis is just taken for granted and the results from it are impeccable. That they really tell the story and this is what should happen and does happen. Well, biomechanical analysis, first of all, should be based on a good understanding of the sport before the study is even undertaken. But too often, an analysis is done, and you read it, and it means nothing. That is surprising. When I say it means nothing, it's because typically the analysis will give you all numbers. Well, at this angle, the force generated was so-and-so. At this angle, the force generated was so-and-so. Or when the foot was in contact with the ground, there was X pounds of force in the vertical direction. At takeoff, there was very little force being exerted in a horizontal direction, or there was no force being exerted. Or this one particular joint action didn't show any activity, or the amount of force exerted by that joint action was minimal. So, when you get these numbers from a biomechanical analysis, we have to understand what they mean. Numbers are good, but only on a highest level. Most important for practical application of a biomechanical analysis should be, what does it show me that needs improvement? How can I improve my performance? If I'm looking for generation of force, how do I generate this force? Not just to say, well, a tremendous amount of force is generated when a foot hits the ground. Well, yes, that's obvious. And we can even measure how much force. But that doesn't mean that's the whole story. How is that force being generated? What does the body do to generate that force on impact? See, this is a big discussion that goes on in running quite a bit. Everybody's somehow impressed with the numbers, saying, look at all of the force generated at contact. This is the way even some studies by Dr. Wayan and even Dr. Mann, I believe, who have done studies showing that the vertical forces on touchdown are very, very high, up to 1,000 pounds. Great, that's true. What does it mean? How did that 1,000 pounds of force get generated? What did the body do in that running motion to create this kind of force? That's the key element. Not how much force. We know it's a tremendous amount. How is it generated? Because if I'm working with my athlete now, I have to tell him, you do this, and now you're going to generate even more force. So if it's that important, we have to know what to do in order to generate more force. But this is always left out. Everybody talks, well, if it's all of that force and the force is in a vertical direction, well, certainly your body's erect when the foot hits the ground, at least in sprinting. So when you're erect, you're measuring the forces in a vertical direction, but this doesn't mean you have to give back the same force vertically. And this is what is interpreted. See, instead of looking at how and why, and what does it mean, and how we can use it, they get lost on the numbers and say, well, if 1,000 pounds of force is coming down, we have to put 1,000 pounds of force back up. Doesn't mean that. Because there are other things that happen once the foot's in contact with the ground. A lot of the force is used for absorption of the forces on landing. Some of the force is withstood in the muscle to prevent this from sinking all the way down on the ground. And some of the force is used to load the muscles of the calf muscles to be used in the push-off. So we can look at all of these. What happens to the force? Instead of just interpreting right away, well, if you have X amounts of force now, we got to give X amount of force back. This is not an analysis. This does not show understanding. And it's the same thing where you have studies showing, well, the vertical component is most important. But if you're running horizontally, a sprinter who hardly shows any vertical deviation of his center of gravity. And then they say vertical force is most important. But you're moving horizontally. So it's well known in physics, basic physics, says that if you want to go the furthest horizontally, you must have the largest force directed horizontally, a minimal force developed vertically. This is simple, basic physics. But yet the people who do some of these analyses, biomechanical analyses, don't interpret it that way. They forget the basics of physics. They get so lost in the numbers. So it may sound like I'm rambling here, but not really. But I'm just trying to bring out how we get bogged down in some of these analyses with numbers rather than understanding. This is why we need a biomechanical analysis. A biomechanical analysis, if you understand the sport and what's involved in execution of that sport, it will tell you what you're doing effectively and what you're not doing effectively. So you need this analysis to help guide you in your training. Well, if you don't have a particular element, let's say if we use running as an example, for example, you don't have a good knee drive. This is, tremendous amount of energy used in that, and it is related to speed. Well, then we know we have to exercise the muscles to get more speed out of them. So with the analysis, it tells us where we're weak, where we're strong, what needs improvement. Is a change in technique dictated? If so, how do we make that change? Well, we know that that change is going to be effective in bringing about what we want for the end result. Again, it's not just knowing the technique, but understanding what's behind the technique. We have to understand. Then we can apply this to the coaching. Too often, if you have a coach that says, do this, do this, do this, and doesn't tell you why, or if you ask him why, doesn't have an explanation for it, then I would question it. Doesn't mean he's wrong, but if he doesn't understand, good probability. So with this analysis, it'll also tell you where weaknesses are muscularly. See, when I do a biomechanical analysis, it really dictates the training program. It tells me where you need improvement in technique. It tells me where you're weak, where you're strong. Then I can adjust the training program to address the weaknesses and any changes in technique where they're dictated. And then I can even use specialized exercises not only to improve technique, but also to enhance the technique and the execution of that particular skill. So biomechanical analysis is phenomenal. It's needed. It's dynamite. But it's only going to be of value if you first understand the sport. Find someone who understands what's involved in execution of that skill. Then, how can I improve it? How can I be better? The biomechanical analysis will tell you exactly what you need and direct the training program to enable you to fully develop your potential. Otherwise, you may be doing a heck of a lot of work, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to become a better athlete. The biomechanical analysis will enable you or direct you into being a much better athlete. That's why it is critical to your success.